Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here with my dear friend Keith Spears, the VP of Tide. How are you doing?
I am doing great, Sydney. It's always great to be chatting with you.
Awesome. I absolutely love being around your energy. It will always lighten up my week and my day. So
Mhm.
keep it up. And so Keith, would love to learn a little bit more about Tide and the organization and their mission for impact investment.
Yeah, so Tides is a social justice foundation. Our mission is to shift and strengthen power to communities that have historically been denied access to power. So we have about 800 plus $1 million. And it's all donor advised fund capital. So these are wealthy individuals, families, and companies that we partner with to invest their capital and then look to deploy that capital in terms of philanthropic causes. So last year, we gave out $760 million in grants to 3,600 nonprofits globally. And so my mission is to invest that capital prudently, the $800 million, so that we have the money to provide those grants going forward.
That's
So I'm very excited about the work that we do. It's hugely impactful, and we've got a great team to do it.
So if you give us a breakdown about how much goes into, let's say, grants, which are money that you give out but you don't get a return on, versus direct investments in smaller companies or funds in the VC space, how would that generally look like in your organization?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're not a traditional endowed foundation per se, where we invest 5% of our money, or give away 5% of our money. Rather, money comes in kind of every year, and it could be as high as a billion to a 1.5 billion, and then it goes out pretty quickly within the next 1 to 3 years in terms of grants. So literally, we have historically deployed about 100% of the capital that comes in the door, whereas typical kind of endowments, foundations only give out as much as like 25% a year of what they get in. So
Okay.
we're very committed to the philanthropic work that we do. But we do have a corpus of about $800 million that is kind of our capital that we use to invest to help pay for some of those grants and then invest to help pay for operations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so because when you invest in other things that are for profit, like funds
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
direct investments, you have a payback period that you guys are expecting. And how does that kind of change over time during the different climate? Do you then have to adjust it and then, put that out there? Or how do you kind of manage that as a landscape changes?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do right now is driven by our donor advised fund partners. They'll say, look, I want to invest in XYZ fund or company.
Mhm.
We do the due diligence and we make it happen. And the time horizon for those investments can be very short, 1 to 3 years, or it could be a little bit longer if it's kind of an investment in a climate fund or investment in some kind of impactful company. And just in terms of how we evaluate opportunities, because we provide the grants pretty quickly, as what we
Yeah.
just been discussing, our time horizon is kind of a couple years. So we have a lot of capital in cash and a lot of capital in fixed income and bonds. So we know we have the money to make those grant payments. Uh,
Oh,
going going forward, we want to do more in the way of alternative investments. In terms of venture capital,
yeah.
private equity, growth equity. We do that currently, but it's not as big a part of what we are doing, and we want to do more of that going forward. And part of our strategy will be to develop products that are consistent with what our donor advised fund partners want to invest in, whether it's climate justice, racial justice, health and wellness, education, financial access. We'll come up with these products and then hopefully attract more capital that has a longer term perspective and have greater impact as well.
I feel like you're one of those, like when you were an elementary school student and the teacher was asking like what you wanted to do when you grow up, and you're like, I want to save the world, and you're making it happen. I love it. I know that you have this tremendous amount of experience that I so respect. So over 30 years of experience in the industry, you've seen landscapes of how impact has evolved over time, especially impact investment. So I was wondering what you kind of see in terms of trends for the future of impact investment.
Yeah, I think what I see is that there's a new generation of wealth, right? Kind of the younger generation understands that with any investment that they make, there's going to be an impact, right? It could be positive or negative. And so invariably what they're focused on are investments where there's some positive impact, right? And so we see a lot of focus on climate, right? And just making sure that we are making investments that are helping the world as opposed to taking us back. And so I think from our perspective, that is the one issue that people are super passionate about, particularly the next generation.
Yeah.
So our belief is that this notion of whether you want to call it impact investing or ESG or whatever, I know there's a lot of headwinds against that,
Mhm.
but we fundamentally believe um, that there's a lot of interest going forward in
Yeah.
doing that. And we also believe that you can generate great returns and have a huge impact as well, that they're not diametrically opposed to one another. And so,
Absolutely.
as we talk to investors, I think they feel the same way, the groups that we talk to. And so, we are always on the lookout for great opportunities to invest in. As fiduciaries, we think it's important, right, to generate great returns, but
Yeah.
also to reduce the risk in the portfolio, right? So, to the extent you manage climate risk, that reduces the risk in the portfolio. To the extent you look for diverse led companies and funds, we think that that enhances alpha, right? And there's a lot of data that supports that. So that's kind of what we are leaning into as an organization.
That's really great. And I think that you really hit it on the head where you're talking about how young people have this focus on doing good. And so I've read that for the Gen Z generation, those that were graduating from schools and they're looking for their first jobs, they actually are hesitant to actually sign on to a corporate job offer if that corporation doesn't have like a standout, like saying that they are committed to environmental and climate sustainability. And I thought that was so interesting to have that as one of your reasons to turn down an opportunity.
Mhm.
And that's like a big percentage too. So it's really interesting of like just how people are seeing it these days and how mainstream that it's in these conversations for young people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as I mentioned, there is pushback against, climate, ESG, diversity. But I
Yeah.
think there are a number of folks in decision-making authority who understand the ability to attract great talent and to retain great talent based on some of these things. And so I couldn't agree with you more. This is a trend that we're seeing, and we fully expect it to continue. And I think from our perspective, we want to make investments that are aligned with that. They're aligned with our values,
Yeah.
our partners' values, and really are hoping to have a change in the world going forward, both in terms of our philanthropic work and also our investment work.
No, absolutely. And I'd love to go into because I also worked at a climate fund. And so the climate fund that I worked for was a venture studio fund. And we use the same criteria as like the Paris Accord. So I'm sure there are lots of other criteria that people can use in terms of how you are measuring impact, right, in the world. And so I was wondering what are other criteria that are important in terms of either ESG or climate or health kind of impact investments that you've seen in the past?
So I've had the good fortune of leading impact investing when I was at a firm called Hamilton Lane. I
Mm,
think it's now about 800 billion. We managed money for CalPERS, $550 million.
mm,
And as a condition of our investment, we said we wanted to measure certain things, right? And so in order to get the capital, you had to agree to track these things. And
right.
so that included how much money went into low moderate income areas.
Okay.
About 50% did. How many jobs are we supporting? We supported about 120,000 jobs.
Wow.
What level of diversity was there at the company? And I think 60% had at least one woman at the C-suite, 50% at least one person of color at the C-suite. And then we looked at job growth. And, if you look at the job growth since we started that fund, that was back in 2007. In the state, this is all focused on the state of California,
Mhm.
anywhere between 85 and 90% of the growth in the state was attributable to that program. So those are some of the things that we tracked historically.
Wow.
In my current position at Tide, we will track the same things, but also be very focused around climate,
Mhm.
CO2 emission reduction, and then also thinking not only about the pure data, which we have to be able to show and demonstrate, to make the case that you can get great returns and have huge impact. But also we got to look at the stories, look at the impact that we're having, right? And so, because not everyone is persuaded by data, I am, but not everyone is. And so you have to be able to communicate and develop stories around the work that you're doing, both from a philanthropic perspective and from an impact investing perspective. And I think the next iteration of impact investing will be to kind of marry those two. So we're having conversations with groups that track both of those so we can see the overall impact of all the work that we're doing in other endowments, foundations, family offices as well.
Oh, that is phenomenal. I love that you have these internal trackers and then you can actually like have data to be able to prove things. So to me, I also love data. I think that data is king and context is queen, right?
Hmm.
So if you put it into the right context, you're always able to relate it to someone else in the audience. So that's wonderful. Let's go over like the different kind of challenges that you have seen in terms of ESG and climate. So that might be particularly helpful for first-time fund managers or first-time entrepreneurs to be aware of.
Yeah, I think there are a number of challenges. Right now, the biggest challenge is raising capital. There are a number of emerging managers that have great track record, but it's been a tough fundraising market for them over the last year or two. And I think going into the future, there'll be, as I mentioned, headwinds around ESG, around diversity, around climate impact, all that with the new administration. And so I think it just makes it even more challenging. So it really comes down to just being really hyper focused on values aligned partners like Tides and others. And, we always try to be as helpful as we can in our communication with potential partners. And if we can't do it, we try to refer them to other folks. And so I think that going through that process of trying to continually improve the message and as you're interacting with folks, understanding why it did work that they are investing and why it did not and what you can do to improve. So that constant improvement through this process, I think, is going to be incredibly important. I think the other thing is once you do get a fund up and running, you have to be hyper focused on returns. You have to be focused on what you can do as a fund manager to pull all the different levers that you have to generate great returns, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to, raise more capital down the road. And I think the other thing I would just say is, strategic partnerships are critical. So as we look to deploy capital, we're looking to see how we can partner with other endowments, foundations, folks who may have best practices around any given strategy in order to have a greater impact. And so I think that's going to be critically important, particularly as, if there is kind of the slowdown in overall fundraising, to kind of manage your resources accordingly to have that impact to kind of show the returns and the impact going forward.
Absolutely. I think that these are fantastic tips. You know, you reminded me of this great quote when you were talking about having really important strategic partners and how you can then tap into, the things that they do, then the mission that they are carrying forward. It was a quote from, I believe, Arnold Schwarzenegger on the Tim Ferriss podcast. He said, "I am not but an ordinary man. I stand on the shoulders of titans." So standing on the shoulders of titans will help you see further. And I really love that. I think that you bring out that greatness when you get to partner with other great foundations and organizations too, because you guys do so many phenomenal things, and I absolutely am loving it.
Yeah.
The
The,
past, yeah.
the other thing I would just say, and that reminds me of another point, is that there are a number of these conferences, convenings around impact investing. I just went to one sponsored by Opal, which is a family office network
Mm.
in Laguna Niguel. And I encourage folks to go to those types of events because it kind of allows you to interact and to think and see how you can partner with others who, have similar values and that type of thing. So, I know for me, I'm kind of shy and everything like that, but it's important to kind of do that kind of work because I think that's how you can extend the work that you're doing, have the impact, and standing on the shoulders of titans and that type of thing. And it's very inspirational as well. It kind of keeps you going because it can be a long haul to try to raise money to try to have the impact that we're all trying to have.
Yeah, and I think that that is critically important when it comes to fund managers who are trying to raise money and have very similar vision, because
Hmm.
it can, in a way, feel very competitive to see
Hmm.
how you're going to stand out from one another. But in another way, it can be such a lonely process if you don't have that collaborative mindset as well.
Yeah.
It's the same as being an entrepreneur, of being a founder, you know.
Yeah.
Journey is very unique to you. And in my
Hmm.
experience, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And so I can't imagine, what it would have been like if I came from a place where I didn't have other founder friends and other
Yeah.
people who were in that mission aligned mindset around me. So I love that you get to continuously be engaged in these environments. I think that's really great.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And I do think that you talk about the hardest thing in the world is being an entrepreneur. I also think that one of the hardest things is being a fund manager, which is
Yeah.
also like being an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
where you have to kind of convince someone to give you money to invest,
Yes.
and oftentimes there's not a pool of assets that they can look at. It's really your ability to convey a message and a vision and a strategy that can generate alpha, and so that is very challenging. And so finding programs that can help you as an emerging manager. There's a group called VC Include that I used to be affiliated with, Include Ventures, that does that. And there are other programs like that that I highly encourage folks to look at to see if that could be a pathway for them. And then leveraging those relationships and resources. And I've seen emerging managers actually go to market collectively as a group to say, okay, we have a unique strategy as opposed to competing with one another. Let's kind of see how we can go to market as a unified group to kind of attract
Wow.
more capital. So I've seen that as well. So that's pretty
Okay.
interesting. So there are a lot of different strategies, and I think given this market environment, you have to be creative to see what can be possible.
No, absolutely. And I actually have never heard of this strategy because I would have thought this was like everybody should do this. This is a genius thing to do. And when you can combine your skill sets, you can combine your resources and network and everything, you could be extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah.
I this year, as I have told you in the past, I have met over 200 VCs added to my network just this year, and more often than not. Doesn't matter what their title is, doesn't matter how many years they have or how few years they have in the industry, they will say, one day I want to start my own fund. And I'm
Hmm.
like, really? Why? Being an entrepreneur
Hmm.
is so hard.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, what is your advice for people who want to start their own fund, either in this climate or later on down the road when they have more experiences? What kind of things would help people stand out necessarily?
Well, I think one thing that you just mentioned is ecosystem, right? I fundamentally believe that a lot of value is generated through your network and through your ecosystem. And so, to the extent anyone's thinking about doing this, building that ecosystem, having those 200 plus meetings with others who are already doing it, learning best practices, is going to be critically important. And then, what the other thing I've seen folks do is um, to start proving the concept, right? Having a proof of concept
Yeah,
fund or strategy where it could be, small amounts of capital from yourself, your family to kind of make the case and show that this is a strategy that makes sense. And as you do that, perfect it, along the way, is another thing. And I think I mentioned the programs, the emerging manager programs, which I think could be a great way to, especially if you're just starting thinking about what to do, right?
right.
And then I think just thinking about points of differentiation, right? What makes you unique, different?
Yeah.
How do you add value? How do you drive value within a company or portfolio and leveraging your skills, whatever that may be, whether it's, marketing, whether it's technology, whether it's financial engineering, whatever it is, leaning into that, as well as, thinking about a team. It's tough when you are starting out to think about more than a one person kind of situation because it's so nascent. But thinking about a team, thinking about what skills you have, what skills could be complementary to what you're trying to do, whose values aligned, and who can help you get from point A to point B, which would be a successful fund essentially.
And also the I think that, more often than not, they want a level of impact that is coming into their investment thesis. And I feel like that was becoming more and more important to some of the people that I've been talking to who were thinking of starting a new fund or they have just started a new fund, because they wanted to see a world that they didn't currently live in. They
Yeah.
wanted to help build something that they currently didn't have for themselves, right? And that was absolutely phenomenal. But the way to actually stand out on how you have that is so different because that part is so tricky.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what I've seen with a number of emerging managers, in particular, funds led by women, people of color, they've got unique different experiences and unique points of view about the world and what could be done differently. And so I see that that sense of that passion, that sense that, we can make a difference. We can work together to change the world. And that's kind of one of the best things about my job is that and I'm sure you've seen it as you've talked to a lot of venture capital firms and founders, is that desire to make a difference. And so it's very energizing to be around that and to see that on a daily basis. I may have like, 5 to 10 calls on a daily basis with different groups who are doing different things that can have a transformative impact on the world at large. And so that is wonderful. And I think, um, that kind of a passion, that kind of perspective can help attract, the capital that you're looking to do, right? You're looking to invest essentially. So I encourage people to have that passion, to think about what their why is and to figure out how to really execute against that and to really have the impact that they're looking to have in general.
I know that a lot of people, pitch to you in terms of their why, their investment thesis, as well as their companies, of course, because you have a range of people that come to you. Um,
hmm
I was wondering if, in recent memory, do you recall something that particularly stood out that you thought like, huh, that's different,
hmm
that you might like to share?
Well, yeah, I literally see things on a daily basis. I'll just share one, and this is just recent, right? So I had a great conversation with a group that basically provides insurance for nonprofits, for social justice organizations.
Oh,
They support 27,000 nonprofits with the work that they do, and they've grown from $1 million to about $1 billion business and all doing hugely impactful work. They're looking to raise some capital. We're having a conversation with them. So that's the kind of thing that is really exciting to me because we support a lot of nonprofits. So maybe there's some
right.
synergies in terms of what we do, what they do, um, and um, and it allows homeless shelters, folks who do foster care, job training, whatever, that allows them to be in business to have the impact that they want to have. And so that's one example. Another example is a company that basically matches um, uh, lenders to nonprofits to get the best terms possible for loans for nonprofits. So those are just a couple of things I'm really interested in because it's not only an investment opportunity, but it's also potentially synergistic with the work that we already do and adding to the value that we can provide to all the nonprofits that we serve. So that's just an example of something that those are two examples of things that pique my interest right now.
So why do nonprofits not have insurance like regular insurance? Why don't they go through regular business insurance?
That's a great question. So, generally speaking, they can, but it's kind of a limited market for nonprofits, right? And there are a lot of folks, and so call it, 5 or 6 different groups that really focus in on nonprofit insurance. And a lot of them have kind of said, look, I'm getting out of the business, I'm doing something else. And so that creates an opportunity for this one group that's kind of the leader in the space.
Oh,
And if you're a nonprofit and you don't have this option, you go to a situation where it becomes ridiculously expensive. Like for $1 million policy, it may cost you $900,000, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? So, uh, so this organization has that ability to really um, service nonprofits. They just need the capital from a regulatory perspective to do it. And so that's what we're chatting with them about.
wow. So you have to hit a certain kind of threshold in order for you to get certain kinds of benefits. That
Yeah.
is, I never knew that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh man. So would love to close this amazing session with asking about, so there's this saying in BC, you want to be contrarian and right.
Hmm.
And I'm doing the imitation of my friend who keeps saying it a lot. So I would love to see, what is one of your thesis or beliefs in the impact investment that you believe is contrarian, but right, or have proven to be right in the past. I can share with you mine first if you like.
Yeah, love to hear yours.
I believe that we all consciously or subconsciously vote with our dollars, right? And we vote with things that we actually may not be as conscious about. And so in our society, in North America, how much you are giving your most precious being, your children, to certain kinds of schools, right? And then how much we're paying those teachers, how much we're paying, elderly care for our parents that took care of us, and how we grew up and gave everything to us, and how like certain kinds of workers are completely overworked, certain workers are undervalued in a variety of different ways. But how we're voting with our dollars is really hoping to change that landscape. And then in the flip side, how much, let's say, an investment banker would then generate and
Hmm.
the kind of value that they're bringing. COVID has taught us a tremendous amount when it comes to what we are valuing in terms of life, and
Hmm.
what are essentials and not essentials in the same kinds of ways. And I think that it's a great time right now to kind of rethink a lot of these decisions that we're making and a lot of these things that we as a generation would want to invest in, either as an LP, either as a consumer, or either as a creator.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I think that's well stated. And I think if I had to pick one thing from a contrarian point of view, it's really a focus on women and diverse founders, right? And fund managers. So there's a lot of data that supports that diversity drives alpha, which makes sense, right? If you are sitting around a table, you have a lot of different points of view,
Yeah.
young, old, different ethnicities and races.
Mhm.
You're going to come up with a better decision as opposed to a monolithic group, right? And it just makes
Yeah.
sense. And so I know for me, when I managed that pool of capital for CalPERS that I mentioned earlier, where we were focused on California, it was 550 million.
Mhm.
That was an impact focused fund, focused on diversity, focused on impact, but it was also the number one fund based on PitchBook for that vintage year, right? And that
Wow.
shows that you can have it all, right? You can have the great returns, you can have the impact, right?
Mhm.
And then a couple other data points I'll just share is that there's a big manager that a diverse led manager that we supported. We when I was at Hamilton Lane, we gave them 300 million out of $1 billion, and they've gone on to now have like 80, 90 billion that they manage. And historically they've done a great job. 30% rate of return across the board, software technology focused. But in their impact deals, anything having to do with health and wellness, government services, education, they actually generate a 35% rate of return. So that is fantastic. That shows that you can generate great returns and have an impact as well. And so their impact related deals did even better. And then one last data point that I'll just share regarding emerging managers diversity. There's a group that we're talking to that's invested about $30 billion in kind of small, mid-sized buyout. 20 billion of that has been in kind of non-diverse, mainstream firms. 10 or a third have been in kind of diverse-led, women-led fund
Mhm.
managers. This is all private equity. In those deals, they generated a 16% rate of return annually in terms of the non-diverse deals, and 25% annually in terms of the diverse-led deals. And so that's 900 basis points of alpha generation
Yeah.
by just looking at these more diverse fund managers. And so I think as fiduciaries, it's important that we do be somewhat contrarian because there's very limited money going to women or people of color.
Yeah.
It's important to be contrarian, look at the data and
Yeah.
see where we can generate alpha and where you can also reduce risk. And so that's kind of something that we're focused on at Tides for sure.
That's amazing. These stats are better than the S&P 500. You might as well invest in this instead.
Right,
That's
exactly.
incredible. Awesome. And thank you so much for sharing. I also love that you're a data nerd. So I feel like it always helps. So thank you, Keith, for coming on to an episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. And thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thanks so much, Sydney. Really appreciate it. So much fun.